Gentlemen, here we are at the end of the season. I was hoping that my final cocktail of the year would be some fancy champagne cocktail. I'd pop the cork and celebrate my championship, but unfortunately, I was no match for Nick this year. I'd be hard pressed to find anyone who could have beat him in that championship game, but there you go. It is what it is. So it's been a pretty good season overall. I'm pretty happy with myself. I had a competitive year. A lot of fun, a lot of bad teams and interesting teams and silly shit going on. And now that it's all over, I just can't wait for the draft next year, I guess, and get it all started again. But until then, I figure I could warm your hearts with one last cocktail. This is the easiest one to make out of any of them. So I guess we'll get started. I don't know if anybody got my list when I sent it out on Sunday or Monday about what you need to make this, but it's pretty basic. The drink is called an open and shut, much like our wonderful fantasy season is open and shut. Basically, it's called a scaffa, is what the style of cocktail or nightcap that it is, which like is supposed to be like a cabinet shelf or something along those lines. And basically it's just a scaffa is a room temperature cocktail that you just kind of throw together based on random stuff that you have. It's an Italian thing, but this one in particular is 1 part brandy of some sort. I think the actual recipe maybe calls for cognac or Armagnac, which I do have, but for this drink I like to use maybe a sweeter brandy or a cheaper brandy, because you're mixing it, and the good stuff you kind of want to drink on its own. So I'm going to be using Cedar Ridge fruit brandy. I used to be able to get just straight apple brandy from Cedar Ridge, and it was phenomenal. And I haven't seen it in stores for a couple years now. I don't know if they just didn't have a batch of apples that worked or what the deal is, but if you get a chance to find the Cedar Ridge apple brandy, I would highly recommend it. It's good stuff. But it's going to be 1 part brandy of some sort and then 3 parts Amaro. I'm using Amaro Lucano, which is technically what they call for in the recipe, but you can use any Amaro you have. I know Brian's got that Braulio from a previous cocktail. That's a real piney, more bitter Amaro than the Amaro Lucano, but it would go great with brandy. Really, it's going to be the strongest flavor in the cocktail. It's going to be your Amaro, so it's a good opportunity to enjoy some Amaro. Maybe that you have some lying around, or you bought some like Brian did for 1 cocktail, and you have a big old bottle laying around afterwards. This is a good way to drink some of it, and it's good stuff. Especially if you are going to use a more bitter Amaro, I recommend a fruit brandy or an apple brandy, something that's a little sweeter than your typical cognac or Armagnac. But I'm using Amaro Lucano. I think I said on the chat you can get like Amaro Nonino, which is a little higher proof, so that would make it a little stronger. Or Amaro Averna, which I've mentioned before. It's kind of my go-to. I think that's like everyone should get a bottle of Amaro Averna to have in their bar. And anytime a cocktail calls for Amaro, you can use that stuff. It's very neutral Amaro. It's kind of right down the middle. It's great. It's a really good one, actually. So, in fact, the only reason I really use Amaro Lucano for this cocktail is because I bought a bottle of it specifically for this cocktail like a year ago, and I haven't worked through it yet. So I'm gonna keep using it. So we can get started. Again, it's 3-1. So we'll start with the brandy. I'm gonna do 1 ounce brandy. Man, that championship really knocked me on my ass. Well, I know Nick's feeling real good about himself, and he should. He had a hell of a team. I'm actually, to be honest, I'm kind of happy that he didn't even have to worry about CJ Stroud starting, because that would have been pretty awful if I would have lost the championship game because the guy I played started the quarterback I would have drafted had I not traded down in the draft. So it all worked out for me in those regards, and in no other regard. All right, so you got the 1 ounce of brandy, and now we're gonna do 3 ounces of the Amaro. Now, I don't know if you've noticed the different measuring cups or jiggers that I've used. But your typical one will be 1 ounce on one side and 1.5 ounce on the other side. And then it'll have demarcated with a 1/2 ounce and 3/4 of an ounce, respectively. So that's why I used the one side for the 1 ounce of brandy and then flipped over to the 1.5 ounce twice for the 3 ounces of Amaro Lucano. In case anybody didn't notice that. So you pour it just straight into your glass. You don't, you're not mixing it on ice, shaking it, stirring it, anything. You just put it right into the highball or old-fashioned glass, any glass you got really. And you can kind of swirl it a little bit. You might even want to use like a brandy balloon glass or something if you want, since you're using brandy. You kind of swirl it around a little bit, kind of let it mix up a little bit. And then, completely optional, I like to do it, but it doesn't matter that much, is you can garnish it with an orange peel or a lemon peel. Some kind of citrus kind of can balance all of it. I just tend to like to do that. I always have fruit around anyway, so. This is a really great nightcap. There you go, it's done. So quick. It's a good wintertime nightcap. It's a, room temperature drink. It warms you up with the brandy and the Amaro. The fact that it's mostly Amaro means it's not that strong, It's hard to get a good night's sleep if you have too much to drink, because your body converts all that alcohol into sugar and it wakes you up throughout the night. But this is a really good nightcap. It's a good way to finish off a day of drinking, or a season of drinking and swearing and cheering and throwing and getting upset. So almost like a somber end of the season kind of video. So I do have a few questions I want to answer. And so I'm going to go back. Brian had a question for my cocktail video from Championship Week that I ended up not being able to put out. There's my cuckoo clock. That's going to go about 5 more times now. And so one of his questions was, what's the best way to handle the crazy drunk uncle at Thanksgiving? A little late, I'll admit, on all this. And what are the signs that one has become the crazy drunk uncle? Wow. I feel like the best way to handle a crazy drunk uncle is the best way to handle anyone drunk, which is to lean into something they really like talking about. If you got a weird drunk guy who you don't agree with a lot of things, but there's that one thing that you kind of like a sports team or a TV show or something, just start fucking egging them, just getting them into that. Especially if it's something that you feel like they think they're one of the only people who feel that way about it, so they can get on their high horse and be like, oh, people don't even understand. Like, that's how you kind of get them talking about stupid shit that nothing matters. And you can avoid talking about the stuff that gets other people angry, And signs that one has become a drunk uncle is if you're drinking a lot and people start egging you on about things that is an openly acceptable subject. So, for me, if somebody, while I was in my cup, started just lambasting the Cubs and talking about the offseason and stuff and got me rolling on it, then I'd realize, like, hey, wait a minute. They don't want me talking about other things. This is all a ploy. So do with that what you will. Another question that Brian posed specifically for this is, how do you think Nick fixed the league in his favor this year? Obviously, Nick didn't fix anything in his favor, but I think it comes down to, I think Nick just cares more than anyone else, which isn't necessarily an insult, but he sure does put a lot more time into it than everyone else, I think. Which, again, not an insult. I have the time to put into it, and I don't, and that's on me. I feel like that's probably the case for a lot of people. So I don't think he fixed the league in his favor. He just, he did a really good job picking up players and drafting players that people didn't draft and pick up. It's kind of basic, I guess, but, good for him. I have nothing against Nick. I know everyone gets pissed off when he wins, but whatever. He did better than everyone, and that's what happens. And then Nick himself has a couple of questions. One is he went with my suggestion for his championship bottle, and he wants to know if it was a trick. I suggested, so people know, the Balvenie Doublewood Scotch, something that Eric also suggested when we did our live stream. And it wasn't a trick. I wish that I would have thought of trying to trick him and suggesting he pick something lesser. The fact is that Brian did a really good job this year. I think all of the bottles are pretty phenomenal. But, so I don't think you can go wrong with any of them. But the Balvenie Doublewood, I always have a bottle of Doublewood in my house almost constantly because it's such a go-to single malt Scotch that everyone would enjoy. So, and it's not break your bank expensive like some things. So, nope, not a trick. And then Nick wants to know, how dumb did I feel as the Phillies almost won the World Series? I have to admit, this one, it was it was before the playoffs even started, I think, that I went out on a limb and said very, very voraciously that the Phillies would not make it to the World Series, and they would not win the World Series, and nobody had any reason to worry. And I felt that at the time, man. I really did. I mean, they were going up against the Cardinals, who always have some weird voodoo magic in that first matchup in the playoffs, and it was just a hard road from there on out. And they took care of business, and every point in the playoffs in which they moved on, Karen can tell you, I was just like, I was laughing at myself in incredulity. I should learn how to say that word. I just couldn't believe it, and it was so hilarious that the team that I had pegged number one as like the least likely team to do this just kept winning, man. And I felt dumb. It was exciting, and I was rooting for him in the end because I didn't want to root for the Astros necessarily, and it's always fun to root for underdogs. But man, that was a crazy one. I love me some baseball. Yeah, everyone knows that. That's a fact. And then looks like I have one last question. This one from Brian, not Brian Kerr, but the Brian from the Brian Brooks from the Phil Brooks team. And he wants to know what I think the U.S. needs to do to produce a good number 9. And he told me to take that as I will. So I'm assuming he said that because he knows that I don't know much about soccer. And yet, I know that when he asks for what the U.S. needs to produce a good number 9, that it's about soccer. I didn't look that up or anything. I just assumed, based on the World Cup today, and I believe much like in basketball, they number all the positions on the soccer field. I don't know what a number 9 is. I don't know if that's like the goalie or if that's like midfielder or center field. I don't know what they're called. So I'll admit I don't know much about it. But the thing about soccer that I've noticed is that it is one of the few sports in the world that a person can get into with nothing but a ball, basically. You don't need anything else, I mean, as much as I love baseball, it's gotten to a point now where if you don't have like a hitting instructor by the time you're in high school, like a personal hitting instructor, and you're doing travel ball and all this shit, spending all this money on gear and coaches and training, like it's very difficult to move on past just amateur status in the sport. Same with football, you can go to a certain extent, you can go out with just a football and friends and make do, but eventually you need more supplies and structure and all this stuff. And hockey's the same way. You need a lot of gear to keep moving in hockey. But the two things that you don't need anything but the ball is basketball, basically, and soccer. I mean, I guess you need a net and a hoop, respectively, but you can make that out of just about anything. So the thing is that I feel like soccer would really excel in this country, particularly among like low income, lower middle class families, people who can't afford to get all the gear and coaches they need for sports like football and baseball and hockey. Soccer would really excel, except for basketball excels more. And there's more of an obvious route to success and to money, to financial independence through basketball than there is in soccer in this country. And so you're really good athletes who maybe come from parts of the country who don't have a lot of money or a lot of resources, that kind of thing. They end up going to basketball more and football to some smaller extent because they know that there's a path to success and making some money and bettering themselves in a financial way. That could get me down a whole road of how bullshit capitalism is and, you know, how terrifying late stage capitalism is as we see it in this country. But that's beside the point. The point is that I just don't think soccer for the U.S. itself, if you're talking about the U.S. men's national team, it's going to be a while before we're able to produce a lot of homegrown talent because there's just better opportunities for the best athletes in our country to do better in other sports. So we'll see what happens with all that, you know. Maybe basketball, football, and the likes will get flooded with enough talent to where people feel they have a better shot at soccer. You know, I know a lot of MLS teams are starting to be a bigger deal, which will lead to more money and more opportunities and stuff. So we'll have to see how that goes. Anyway, I'm droning on. This is not my first drink of the night, so it might seem like it's hit me harder than it is. But I will say that I had a fantastic season. I enjoy doing these videos a great deal, and I look forward to doing them again next year. And if anybody has any suggestions about how I can improve this or change this at all, please tell me. I'll factor it all in. And I'm really hoping the biggest one, and Nick mentioned it earlier, is I'm really hoping that next year I can get more of a participation. Not that I care that you guys participated or not this year. I just think it would be more fun for everyone if I made it easier for everyone to join me in all the cocktails I make. So, all right. Until next year, gentlemen. Cheers. Get drunk. Stay drunk. Hopefully not all the way until the next year's draft. But I won't judge you. And until next year. Cheers.